Today I want to share with you 10 tips for how to make the best fried chicken. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about those things, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Well, I think most of us love fried chicken, and so today I want to share with you 10 tips that if you follow will guarantee that your fried chicken will come out perfect every time. The first tip is that if you have the time and can brine your chicken overnight, it will really make a difference in the tenderness and the flavor of your chicken. Now, if you don't have time to brine your chicken overnight, if you can brine it for at least a few hours, that'll be helpful too. Now, when it comes to brining your chicken, you have a couple of options. I like to use a baking dish. I find this just gives a nice even coating. But you could also use a bowl or even a plastic bag if you wanted. And for your brine, you have a lot of options as well. You can just brine in salted water, or you could brine in salted water with maybe a little vinegar thrown in. Or if you want to do what I do, is I like to brine my chicken in a combination of buttermilk, salt, and water. Now you don't need to write any of this down because if you open the description under this video, there'll be the word recipe with a link next to it. That'll take you over to my website, same name as my YouTube channel, Mary's Nest, where you can read the recipe online or print it out. Now for my brine, I'm only going to use salt, but you have a lot of options. I season my flour, which we'll get to that step in a little bit, but I season my flour really well. So I like to keep my brine a little more simple. But there are many options for brine recipes on the internet or in cookbooks that you can certainly follow if you want. Some people like to add a little sugar. Some people also will add pepper or maybe even a little spice. There are a lot of options. But I find that the buttermilk helps tenderize, the salt helps tenderize as well as flavor because all of this is going to be infused into the meat of the chicken, and it really works very well, and yet it's very simple. So I'm just going to go ahead and add my salt right into that buttermilk. I've got 2 cups of buttermilk here, and I've got 1 tablespoon of sea salt, and that's just a fine ground sea salt, but use whatever you have. And then I like to go ahead and add 2 cups of water to this buttermilk and salt mixture just to help thin out the buttermilk a little. And I find that it better coats the chicken and can really facilitate that permeation. I don't know if that's a word. It can really help permeate the chicken meat. Now what I'm going to do is take all my chicken pieces, and what I've got here is a whole chicken that's been cut up. You can cut up the chicken yourself, or you can buy the chicken already cut up. Now if you want, you can cut off the wing tips and you can go ahead and save those in your bag where you keep your scraps and whatnot for when you want to make chicken bone broth. But if you want to leave them on, that's fine too. I'm going to leave them on because when it comes to fried chicken, I think people really appreciate every little bit of crispy crust. Now the next tip I want to share with you is when it comes to the breasts, you do want to cut these in half because you want all of your chicken to cook evenly, and you don't want to have a really big piece that may take longer to cook. Plus, when you're cooking fried chicken, you don't want the interior to not be able to cook fully while the crisp skin on the outside is beginning to over brown. So by cutting the breast in half, you're guaranteeing that this is going to cook evenly. Now I've got this second breast cut up. We'll get this into our pan, and then I'm going to go ahead and just clean up my board here and wash my hands, and we'll continue with the next step. I'm going to give this a really great whisking to make sure all that salt is dissolved. And then we're just going to go ahead and pour this brine right on top of our chicken. Well, my chicken is beautifully submerged in its brine. And now if you're using a baking dish like me or a bowl, now you're just going to want to go ahead and cover everything with a little plastic wrap. Then if you're using a plastic bag, just make sure that the seal is very tight, and you may even want to go ahead and put the plastic bag in a bowl just so that nothing leaks when it's in your fridge, because that's what we're going to do next. We're going to pop this in our refrigerator, and we're going to just let this brine overnight, and then tomorrow we'll get ready to cook this chicken and move on to tip number 3. Now I let my chicken brine overnight, and now that brings us to tip number 3. Before you fry your chicken, you want to take it out of your refrigerator a little ahead of time to give it some time to come up to room temperature. And it usually takes somewhere between 30 minutes to an hour to do that. And the reason that you want to allow the chicken to come up to room temperature is because that'll allow it to cook evenly. If your chicken is very cold, it's going to take longer to cook. But what'll happen is the skin will get browner and browner and browner, possibly burnt, while it's waiting for the inside of the chicken to come up to the right temperature and be cooked. So always allow your chicken to come to room temperature before you move on to the next steps. Now the next tip, tip number 4, is very important. You want to make sure that your chicken is dried thoroughly. You don't want to get into a situation where your chicken is very wet, or you're dipping it in something wet, say like buttermilk, then you're dipping it into your flour, and then some people will even do a double dip, back into the buttermilk, back into the flour. You really want to avoid doing that. All you want is a very light coating of flour on your chicken. If you dip your chicken in buttermilk or whatever solution and it's very wet, and then you dredge it into your flour, the coating can become uneven. And then when you go to fry it, you may have little pockets of flour that don't completely cook and can be mushy. And the other reason is you don't need a thick coating to get a crispy fried chicken, because it's not all about the coating. The coating in many ways is just to bring, or in essence sort of be a vehicle to bring in all the seasonings that you're going to be adding to your flour to give a nice taste to the skin. But it's really the skin that you want to crisp up. Chicken skin is very high in fat. And when you go ahead and cook your chicken, which we'll talk a little bit more in detail when we get to that point, you're going to have that fat in the chicken skin be rendered. It's going to cook and liquefy and be released into the frying pan. And then what you're left with is skin that has had all that fat rendered out. And that's what makes the chicken skin very crispy. It's a very similar process to if you've ever made schmaltz, which is rendered chicken fat, where you cut up the skin and you cut up any other bits of yellow fat that you're able to pull off your chicken, and then you put it in a saucepan and you warm it, and you basically are rendering the chicken fat. It melts and it turns into a liquid form when it's heated. And then all the little bits, so to speak, that are left over will sink to the bottom. And those are wonderful little crispy bits. Well, that's the same thing that happens to your chicken skin when you go ahead and fry chicken. The chicken fat will render out and you'll be left with the crispy bits. But in essence, it's going to be one crispy bit. So you don't need a lot of coating. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dry my chicken. I'm just going to use a paper towel to do this. It has been draining on this rack here, so it's not too wet, which is great. Alrighty, well, I think I've got this chicken nice and dry. So I'm going to go ahead and give my hands a good wash, and then we'll move on to the next step. Now this is tip number 5. It's really important that you season your flour very well, because that's the bulk of where your flavor is going to come from on your crispy skin. Now I'm going to use a bowl to dredge my chicken, but you can certainly use a plate or a baking dish, whatever you like. I just find this is a little neater, it makes a little less of a mess. But in any event, I've got 3 cups of all-purpose flour in here. Next to my flour, I'm going to add a half a cup of cornstarch. Now, if you can't eat corn products, that's no problem. You can leave this out and just add in a little more flour. The reason that I like to add cornstarch is because cornstarch helps pull moisture out of the whole process when we start frying. And it adds crispiness to the coating and the skin. You may even see some recipes where people use 100% cornstarch for their coating. You see that a lot in Japanese recipes because cornstarch just gives a wonderful crisp coating. At the very minimum, you're going to want to at least put salt into your coating. And be generous. I'm going to use a tablespoon of salt. And this is just a fine ground sea salt, but use whatever you have. Next, I like to add a teaspoon of ground pepper. It's just plain black pepper. And then over here, I've got a teaspoon and a half of paprika. And this is sweet paprika. You could certainly use the smoked paprika if you like that. Next, I like to add a little onion powder. You can leave this out or you can definitely add it. You could also add, if you like, garlic powder. I find that sometimes the garlic powder kind of steals the show and can overpower the taste. But if you like, and I do like garlic, but I find that the onion powder works very well to just add a nice level of flavor and almost like a little bit of sweetness. And I've got a teaspoon of the onion powder. But really, you can make this completely your own. I see some people add dried basil, dried oregano, all kinds of things like that. So it's really just a matter of what you like. And then finally, I'm going to add in a little spice. I've just got a teaspoon here of cayenne pepper. Now, you could use any spicy pepper you like, or again, you can leave it out. Ancho chilies are really nice. I love chipotles. It's a smoked jalapeno, but my husband's not too fond of it, so I'm just going to go with the cayenne today. But experiment and see what you like. Just give it a little taste on your pinky and see if you like ancho chili powder or chipotle. They can be wonderful when making a coating for fried chicken. Now we're going to get ready to dredge our chicken. It's nice and dry, and I've got another baking sheet over here. Don't worry if you don't have a rack, that's fine. You can just put it on a plate, whatever you have. So I'm going to start, when we go to fry these, I'm going to start with like the legs and the wings, since they're generally smaller pieces and will cook up a little quicker than the breasts and the thighs. Now, tip number 6, which I kind of already alluded to when we talked about drying the chicken, is we want to just give a light coating. Now, you want to give a thorough coating. You want to make sure that you get the flour in all the little different nooks and crannies. And then you just want to give it a good shake. You can even give it a good little tap like that. And then you transfer that to your plate or your rack, whatever you're using to hold your chicken before we get ready to fry it. Well, I'm done dredging my chicken in the flour and it looks great. Now you are going to have some flour left over. There's not really any way of getting around that because you want to make sure that you start with plenty of flour so that you're giving the chicken a good tossing as opposed to just a sprinkling. Now this flour has been exposed to raw chicken, so you'll want to discard it. Or if you decide to save it, you can put it in a freezer-safe bag or container, put it in your freezer, and then use it up within the next month or so if you're going to be maybe tossing some chicken cutlets or something like that. But you don't want to keep this at room temperature, and you don't want to use it for anything else because it has been contaminated with the raw chicken. The next tip, tip number 7, is choosing the right pan to fry your chicken in. For us home cooks who are probably just frying up one whole chicken that we've cut up, all we need is a frying pan. You don't need a big pot. We're not going to deep fry this. Now when it comes to frying pans, I really like to use my 10-inch cast iron frying pan, but you can also use a 12-inch cast iron frying pan. The reason I like to go with the 10-inch is because that's the one that fits right on the size burner that I have. You could also use a stainless steel frying pan or a cast iron frying pan that's enameled. But I don't recommend using a non-stick frying pan. They tend to just not be able to create the crispiest crust. Now, tip number 8 is very important. This comes down to choosing the right fat to fry your chicken in. Now, yes, peanut oil is very popular. It's not what I use. I'll tell you why in a minute. But peanut oil is very popular because it has a smoke point up to 450 degrees Fahrenheit. And what that means is that you can heat that oil up to 450 degrees Fahrenheit before it would start to smoke and give off odors and then start to become rancid. And 450 degrees Fahrenheit, I believe, is about 230 degrees Celsius. But for me, as a traditional foods cook, I don't really like to use peanut oil because it's a more processed oil. Yes, because it has a 450 degree Fahrenheit smoke point, it does survive a little bit of the processing that it gets in the factory, but I still find that it's not something that I like to use. Peanut oil is also very high in omega-6. It's an essential fatty acid, and yes, we do need omega-6 in our diet, but if you eat a Western diet, a modern, in my case, a modern American diet, we get plenty of omega-6. So whenever I can find a way to not add something with omega-6 into our diet, I choose something other than peanut oil when frying. However, if peanut oil is what you have available to you and that's what you want to fry in, and you don't fry a lot, you don't make fried chicken a lot or fry other things a lot in peanut oil, so you're not using it on a regular basis in your diet, it's okay to go ahead and use it when we fry the chicken today. I'm saying that like you're following along with me and you're ready to fry chicken. I'm actually not going to use peanut oil. I'm going to use beef tallow. Now, beef tallow has a smoke point of 400 degrees Fahrenheit, and I think that is about 205 degrees Celsius. But what I like about beef tallow is that it's very rich in vitamins. And so I like to use that to fry. And there's very little processing that goes into the process of rendering beef fat into beef tallow. And when I can, I really like to find beef tallow that's from cattle that has been out in pasture and grazing, because that fat is very high in omega-3, another essential fatty acid that's very good for us. It's the same essential fatty acid that we find in salmon. It's very good for our brain, very good for our heart. So whenever I can incorporate any animal fats into our diet that are from pastured animals, so I know that the fat is high in omega-3s, I try to incorporate them. And if you've never fried using beef tallow, I highly recommend it. You are not going to believe how beautifully crisp things come. As a matter of fact, before people got afraid of beef tallow, when the low-fat movement, sort of, at least here in the United States, I'd say what was the 1970s, 80s, we got into the low-fat movement and people got very afraid of beef tallow and any type of saturated fat. It is a saturated fat, but I think they've had, with the keto diet and all of those things, beef tallow has had a resurgence in popularity, and it's actually the fat that McDonald's used many years ago to fry their French fries. So sometimes if you wonder, gee, these French fries aren't like they used to be, now you'll know why. Another option is lard. Lard has a smoke point of 370 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I have to look at my notes because I'm not sure what that is in Celsius, but I know many of you have asked me to always share what the Celsius is. I have written there 185 degrees Celsius. But the nice thing is that lard, especially if you just use the regular lard, not the leaf lard, which is from around the kidneys of the pig and is prized more by bakers because it has very little flavor to it. But just regular lard can really impart a nice flavor to your fried chicken. And as a matter of fact, and maybe those of you who are Southern can chime in on this, I've heard from many Southern cooks, especially living here in Texas, that they may use peanut oil when they fry, but they always love to throw in some bacon grease for the flavor. So you can definitely use lard as well. Now, how much fat do you need to pan fry to make fried chicken? That is always a great question. What you'll want to do is fill your frying pan up to the point of where you've got about 3/4 inches, is that right? It's not really plural because it's under 1 inch, but 3/4 of an inch of fat in your frying pan. Now, if you're using some sort of liquid fat like a peanut oil, you'll want to eyeball this, and basically what 3/4 of an inch of fat in a standard 10-inch frying pan is going to look like is about 1/3 of the way up the side of the frying pan. If you're using a solid fat like beef tallow or lard, you're probably going to need about 3 cups of the solid fat, and once that melts down, it should fill your frying pan to about 3/4 of an inch. If you're using a larger frying pan, obviously you're going to need a little more, and again, just eyeball it and make sure that you have about a third of the pan filled with your oil. Now, tip number 9, you want to fry your chicken at the right temperature. Now, you're going to heat your oil to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. However, you're going to want to actually fry your chicken somewhere between 300 to 325 degrees Fahrenheit, or about 150 degrees Celsius to 160 degrees Celsius. But by heating your oil to 350 degrees Fahrenheit before you put your chicken in, will guarantee that you'll be actually frying your chicken at around 300 to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. Because once you put your chicken into the hot oil, it's going to lower the temperature. Now, a few bonus tips under the number 9 umbrella. Don't overcrowd the chicken. Put just enough chicken in so that it has room to breathe, so to speak, and that it's easy for you to turn it once it's time to turn it. With overcrowding, you're going to lower the heat of the oil too low. You're going to go probably below the 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and then you're going to have to mess with the temperature setting on your stove and try to get it up to temperature, and then it's just going to be taking in oil or fat, whatever you're using, and it's going to get greasy. And so you definitely don't want to overcrowd your chicken. And next, remember, when you put your chicken into your frying pan, always start with its skin side down, because that's going to allow the chicken fat to hit that hot oil at 350 degrees and start to render. And if you remember what I shared with you earlier, we want all that chicken fat to render out of the skin because it's going to leave the skin super crispy. Alrighty, well now let's head on over to the stove and fry up some chicken. Well, the chicken is all fried and it looks wonderful. Tip number 10, when you remove your cooked chicken from the oil, place it on a wire rack or a plate, but not on a paper towel. A paper towel will create steam and make the chicken skin soggy. Now, what I did was I brought my fat in my cast iron frying pan up to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, don't worry if you don't have a thermometer. What you can do is what I still do, even though I have a thermometer, because I made fried chicken a long time ago when I didn't have a thermometer. So you don't need it, so don't worry. But what I like to do is just set your stove to about medium or medium low. Now, every stove is different, but at about medium or medium low, it should be about 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And then what I would do is what I'm showing you here. I start with one wing as my test piece. And I put that wing into the fat I used the beef tallow, which had melted, and I had tested it with my thermometer, so it was 350 degrees Fahrenheit. But if I didn't have my thermometer, I would put it, on medium to medium low. And then I would watch as the fat melted, and you can kind of tell, even if you use oil, it sort of swirls and it looks like it's coming up to temperature. And then I take the wing and I put the wing in, and if it sizzles real beautifully, then I know we're in good shape and we're good to go. Then once that wing looked that it was sizzling nicely and everything was going well, I added the other wing. And then I did the legs, and then little by little I worked my way through the various pieces. And then I had, I believe, 2 of the breast pieces and maybe 1 of the thigh. At the end, I had 3 pieces in there, and they were all sizzling beautifully. Now, how long to cook these pieces? Well, fried chicken can take somewhere up to maybe 14 or 15 minutes. Now I say up to because there is some variation. Wings take the shortest amount of time. Usually maybe 3 to 4 minutes on one side, maybe 3 to 4 minutes on another side. Legs take a little longer, maybe 5 minutes on each side. And the thighs and the breast take the longest, usually about 7 minutes or so on each side. So when I had those 3 pieces in there, those 2 breast pieces and that thigh piece, I let them sizzle away. I usually set my timer, and because I'll be doing something else, and I'll set my timer, and at 7 minutes, I'll check them, and if they look nice and golden and crisp, I know that they're ready to be turned over. Now, if they didn't look quite right, maybe let them go another minute. And one thing I want to mention, if you have a little splatter screen like this, and these are very common, they're easy to find. They often sell these in the kitchen aisle at my grocery store, but these are very easy to find, and they're very reasonable, and they can come in very handy whenever you're frying chicken. And I'll usually put that on top while they're sizzling away to kind of help control the spill. Well, not so much the spills, but the splatters a little. Now, don't worry if you don't have a thermometer like this, where you can test your chicken, because you'll want to make sure that your chicken is cooked. And there are two ways you can do that. One is if you have a thermometer like this, you can put it into the chicken away from the bone and see if it registers about 165 degrees Fahrenheit. Now I say about because I usually go a little higher. When I roast a whole chicken, I often cook it till it registers 185 degrees Fahrenheit. And I know there's a lot of differences of opinion about this, but often when I buy whole chickens at Costco, on the package it says roast to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason that they do that is they had some problems with the chickens, the whole chickens that they were selling when they were only roasting them to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. So they decided that they were going to roast their chickens to 185 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I feel that's very safe. But with fried chicken, I don't worry about going that high. But if the breasts are coming in, since they're individual pieces, it's different than cooking a whole chicken. If the breasts register at 165 degrees Fahrenheit, I'm comfortable with that. And the legs I usually, and not so much the wings, but the legs and the thighs, I like to get to register at about 170 to 175 Fahrenheit. The second way to test for doneness is to simply make an incision into the chicken and make sure the juices run clear. Well, this chicken just looks glorious, and I'm going to take this little breast piece on the end and we'll give it a taste and see how crispy the skin is and if the interior stayed tender and flavorful. Well, this just looks glorious, and I hope you can hear how crisp. Can you hear that? Oh, that skin is so nice and crisp. Alrighty, well, let's give this a taste. Oh, this looks wonderful. Alrighty, oh, I'm going to have to take a close-up picture for you so you can see how beautifully cooked this chicken is and yet still so moist. Alrighty, well, I've got a piece of the chicken and a piece of the skin. Let's see how this is. Mmm. Mmm. Oh, delicious. Excuse me, the chicken is moist and that skin is so crispy. Well, I'm confident that these tips are going to help you make the perfect fried chicken. And if you'd like more chicken recipes, including how to roast a chicken, how to cook a chicken in the Instant Pot, how to fry up chicken cutlets, and more, be sure to click on this video over here. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.